My name's Rob O'Connor. I'm just the moderator today. I have Caroline Murphy with me, who's actually going to be presenting. Just two really quick housekeeping items before we get started. The first is that you'll see in the handout section of your little GoToWebinar panel, I've uploaded the presentation. So if you want to download it and keep it or share it, please feel free to do so. And the second thing is, as always, we want this to be as interactive as possible, so I'll be here fielding questions throughout the presentation. So if you have any questions, just drop them into the question area, and we'll be sure to get to as many as we can at the end. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Caroline.
Thanks, Rob. Hi, everybody. Very excited to be talking to you all today about constructing a mobile app, and we're going to take a very detailed look at costs that you will have in your mobile applications as you're building them. And this is part of our mobile architecture series. If you haven't seen any of the other parts of the mobile architecture series, some parts of this presentation will refer back to some of the concepts, but I'll give a broad overview, but you can always go back for a deeper look at any of those things. And we'll link to that in this presentation, but you can also see it at convey.com. So without further ado, we'll get into it. So by way of introduction, I'm Caroline Murphy, and I head up product marketing here at Convey, and Rob O'Connor is our marketing director, and he's going to be moderating and keeping track of our questions and everything as we go through here. So first, I just want to give you a high-level agenda. So first, we're going to take a look at an overview of some application development and what's required, and how a four-tier architecture fits into it, and what the best practices are when you're developing mobile applications, especially for the enterprise. Now that's important because as we're looking at our detailed time and cost breakdown, we're going to be thinking of it within the framework of developing with these best practices. There are other ways to develop applications that don't include a four-tier architecture, and people use them all the time, but we really feel that the way that is the right way to build mobile applications is with this four-tier architecture and with this application development framework in mind. So we're going to set ourselves up for success by looking at that in a little bit more depth before we go into the breakdowns of the front end, back end, and infrastructure. So first we're going to take a look at what are the building blocks of a good application and a good mobile application framework for your development. So first of all, there are lots of different requirements that are cropping up in the enterprise application development mindset right now. So first of all, a lot of your applications have to be omni-channel. This means that they have to work across multiple devices, and they have to work seamlessly across these different devices. Because of this, there's a lot of different device tool sets that developers need to use. So you can't just develop in iOS, not just in JavaScript. There's a big diversity across different lines of business about what tools and frameworks developers are using. So you need to support all of those different things. You also need to manage connectivity because of the form factor of mobile and just the way that mobile works. Your devices are not always going to be connected, so you need to be able to manage that connectivity. And along with that comes the fact that you need to be syncing your data back and have good data syncing policies that are going to keep track of the latest and greatest version of the data that people are using. Mobile apps also have a large degree of context awareness that is becoming more and more important. So things like where people are, what's going on with the environment around them, what other devices they're connected to. Context awareness is very important in mobile applications. There's also a lot of new features that have to be supported, like your phone has a camera and your phone has an accelerometer, and there's a lot of different potential use cases that you have to support for these new features. It's very different than web. You also have to have support for your enterprise APIs. Now, this becomes very, very important when you are moving to mobile because with lots of web development previously, the hooks into your systems of record were already in place or were a little bit simpler. Within a mobile context, you don't want to bring in all of that information. You want to bring in the relevant information, because otherwise you're going to bog down your device and performance is going to be lagging. And then finally, there's also security. There's a lot of different security concerns with mobile. First of all, mobile devices can be lost, so you have to have systems in place for making sure that data isn't compromised, both when it's at rest and in transit and on the device. So in order to think about this, we're going to take a real-world use case that we have at Convey, and we're going to describe this application and use it as the context for which we're building out this case for the ROI. So the use case here is an e-detailing application. For those of you who are not familiar with the term of e-detailing, basically this is a process checklist type application that is meant for sales reps in the field. So the application itself is a process. The sales reps in the field took this application and they walk through a process in order to show it to healthcare providers. And it's kind of a blend of a catalog and a checklist for compliance. So they have to make sure that the information is up to date, and the correct assignments need to go out to the correct salespeople at the correct time. And obviously, because there's field sales reps that are using this application, they have to be able to use this application offline as well. And it's very important for both the sales, compliance, and marketing arms of this business, because for marketing, they have to ensure that the content's up to date, and they want to contribute to a closed-loop marketing cycle. And for compliance, obviously, they need to prove, in order to actually meet compliance requirements that the government has, that they're walking through a specific process. And for sales, obviously, they want to be able to track their progress and make sure that the right salespeople are talking to the right positions at the right time. So now we're going to take a look at, just in terms of architecting the e-detailing app. It has a lot of different components that it needs in order to be able to function. So on the front end, you're thinking about the user interface. So they had an iOS application. It had to be able to support different form factors, not just for the mobile phone, but also for iPad mini and iPad. They had to make sure that the design was supported for all these different form factors. And they wanted to use systems integrator resources rather than their internal developers for this, because they used a lot of systems integrators for developing their previous applications. So they needed something that could support all those different use cases for their user interface. There's also a bunch of mobile client features that they needed. So obviously, salespeople needed to log in, so they needed something for identity management. It had to be able to work offline. It had to be able to update data without having to redeploy the application in order to make sure they had the latest and greatest products that they were showing to healthcare providers. And the data had to be secure, both at rest and transit, and had to do that via encryption. They had to utilize location services in order to make sure that when a sales rep was moving around that they were getting the right information. And they had to manage their network connectivity as well. I know when you think about it for the back end, they had to connect into they had to connect to OAuth, which was going to feed from their LDAP identity system that already existed. For their file store, they needed a REST interface that also talked to a SOAP API, and also connected via REST to their Salesforce that they already had. They wanted to be able to utilize push notifications and SMS. They wanted their experience to be contextual, so they had a big need for having logic that lived on the back end. And they had to ensure there was compliance and be able to scale. So their previous architecture looked kind of like this. They had a web architecture, and many web architectures have something that looks like this, where they had the client tier, the application tier, and the data tier. And we go over this in more detail in the other Architecting Your 4-Tier Architecture webinar if you want to look a little bit more in depth about that. So yes, you can use this architecture and cobble together some new services and push all these things together, but that takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of money to add this different tier. And so what we say at Convey is that mobile requires a 4-tier architecture, and this is why you have to be able to choose your devices on your client side. You have to be able to support these different pre-built client features. You have to support new mobile services such as data and push notifications, business logic, and identity management. And you have to be able to hook into your enterprise systems via microservices. So we think of it in this framework. So I'm going to talk a little bit about mobile application best practices for development. So first of all, we're going to talk about lifecycle management. So the line of business approach to deploying mobile apps is this very iterative, very agile kind of framework where you build and then you test and then you deploy and then you build and then test and deploy, and you do this iteratively so that you end up with better and better results over time. Meanwhile, IT doesn't want to take that iterative approach to maintaining a lot of their backend systems, because that would end up with a lot of mess, and IT has this more waterfall type approach of design, build, deploy, and then launch that takes place over a much longer cycle. So you need a 4-tier architecture to help support this, because you want to separate your front-end development and your back-end development, and Gartner calls this your digital speed and your industrial speed. So the microservices component actually allows you to decouple your front end and your back end. And so we think that's very important when it comes to building out a system that really works. Another good reason why you want to use something like a managed service provider is that rapidly changing technology is really better as an operational expense. So traditionally, you would buy a lot of different infrastructure pieces, and that would go on your Capex, and all of your, your servers and routers and all the networking equipment that you have would be part of your capital expenditures. Now, often that was thought to be financially wise because you can depreciate those assets, but with rapidly changing technology, it ends up being much better to move from your Capex to actually changing those technology expenditures to be a service, which is an operational expense. So some of the reasons why is that Capex requires a lot of cash. There's a lot of error-prone guesswork. Budget approvals for something this expensive tend to be very lengthy and arduous. And once you purchase your hardware, you're stuck with it for a while until you can get that next cash cycle. And the technology is constantly becoming outdated, so it doesn't make sense to do. So a lot of times the Capex doesn't really align with your business needs, whereas OpEx, you can scale as your requirements change. The short-term spending is usually easier to get approved. You can diversify your investments because they tend to be less expensive overall than purchasing hardware out of pocket. And it can smooth your cash flows over time, and your tech choices can always be the latest and greatest because you're using a service that promises that. So now we're going to get into the meat of the time and cost breakdown, and this is probably what everybody is the most interested in, so we'll try and take our time so that we're not rushing through. So just as an overall picture, MBAS really helps to reduce the time and cost of development. A lot of what people have been spending a lot of their time on is building out all these back-end systems, and we like to kind of break it into two different buckets of code and leverage, and we think that the back-end systems that MBAS creates make it so that you can leverage existing technology and spend your time on the app environment and the app user experience and user interface so that you can really create the best experience so that people won't get tired of the app. So now we've taken this is a graphical approach to what we have. We ran a bunch of different surveys and got back from developers how long it takes to build out these different features with and without convey. And so this is the time difference in terms of person days. So then we'll relate this back to costs afterwards, but just to show you some of the difference here, building out data storage for your front-end development without convey versus with convey, you can see there's an astronomical difference. Same thing with your offline caching and syncing. This is it really adds up, and this is for every single app. So this is just the scenario of using the e-detailing app as our baseline here, which is an iOS application that has a lot of enterprise features that needs to be for different iOS form factors as well. So just on your front end alone, you end up saving a ton of time and money. And so taking a deeper look at that, when I'm talking about logging in and user management, these are the specific line items that we're talking about here. So for data storage, storing data in a new custom data store, new large file store and CDN for large files, doing advanced querying, which is more than CRUD. So these are the different time breakdowns in terms of person days with and without a service like Convey. And here's that continued. So you can see we also included location, access to your internal enterprise data via a SOAP interface, and the front end costs to maintain. Without Convey, we figure, as new iOS versions come out, it takes a little bit of time to put out a new version of your application. So there's, with and without Convey, these things can also be a little bit easier. And then here's the backend breakdown, and this is where a service like Convey really, really shines, because you can see the numbers here are triple what they were with front-end development. And while MBAS can help you with your front-end development, it really, really shines when it comes to the backend. So, time saved here, it's from 80 days down to 11, from 137 days down to just 2. And here's the detailed breakdown of what that looks like and what the line items are that we're talking about here. So for your user management, things like logging in with your username and password, creating user auth roles and session management, user-based business logic and actions, all these things, as you can see, really, really add up. And these are building blocks that you just don't need to build when you are using a managed service like Convey. So here's this continued. So you can see in the backend environment alone, you're saving hundreds of days, which is hundreds and hundreds of man hours. And now I want to take a look at some infrastructure costs. So these are some of these, as we were talking about before, the capital expenditures that people typically have when they're building their own infrastructure. I broke this out into Capex and OpEx, and so this is for an on-premise infrastructure, and you can see I've specified out here what the different costs are. So a top-of-the-line Blade server can run you up to $40,000. Storage, assuming 10 terabytes, is around $25,000. There's these huge costs for networking, virtualization software, database licensing, and then there's a little bit of setup for your professional services as well, just to get those things up and running. And then your OpEx, assuming it's 25% of a full-time engineer, then that's assuming that there's that overhead of about $25,000. And then there's also just maintenance costs. There's various things that have to be updated and maintained, and so that's assuming about 17% of the capital expenditures, not including the services. So overall, it ends up being almost $250,000 just to get entry costs for getting your own infrastructure. So I wanted to explain how we're thinking about translating those person days, those time costs into actual numbers. So here we've got a breakdown of your team composition and then the percentage of their focus and the daily rate, and then we've taken that and created a blended rate. And the blended rate is just multiplied by those person days. So in summary, for a do-it-yourself infrastructure, you've got your front-end development costs, which is those the person days of 444 person days multiplied by that blended rate. Same thing for your back-end and the infrastructure. And the maintenance costs we broke out separately for the front-end and back-end. And you can see that overall it ends up being almost $500,000 for deploying an enterprise-grade application that's similar to our e-detailing application. That ends up translating to 924 person days, and that's obviously you can, if you have multiple developers on it, then that doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to actually be years of your development time, but it's in terms of person days and overhead that it's actually costing you. That's what it breaks out to be. Whereas when you look at something like Convey, even with an enterprise level subscription of $60,000 for Convey, you still end up saving an astronomical amount of time and money. So the cost savings is $317,000, and that's a 66% savings. And your time savings is 575 person days, and that ends up being 62% of your time saved. And I also ran some calculations just to see how much money is saved over time. And so this is again with that same e-detailing application scenario. As you increase the number of apps, the margin between your savings also increases astronomically. And you end up saving over, by your 20th application that's built similarly to your e-detailing application, you end up with millions of dollars of savings. So now we're excited to announce that all of this this work that we've done is we're going to have this live for you to play with soon. Currently, we have the App Cost Estimator, which is the first kind of incarnation of our cost calculator here, and our ROI calculator that has the infrastructure piece of this more integrated and has some other things like a slider for how many applications you're building, is going to be coming out next week. So we're very excited to premiere that, and so please stay tuned for that. And in the meantime, you can also kind of check our math if you want to by going to convey.com/app-cost-estimator. And we have more webinars in our mobile architecture series, and you can find those at this web address that you see before you here. And the next one coming up is on July 1st, and our VP of Product, Jiku, is going to be giving that one, and that one's about MBAS and API management and why they are better together. And then these other 4 webinars are available right now on our website for instant play if you're interested. So with all of that, we are ready for questions.
Thanks, Caroline. That was a great presentation. We had a couple come in while you were presenting. Some people said that their cost inputs or their time inputs were a little bit different than what we had. And they're wondering if there's a way to sort of check the math with those different inputs.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me just get out of this presentation mode, and I will show everyone the App Cost Estimator on Convey. So if you go to the App Cost Estimator right now, so I actually pre-configured this and just went through. You can check different boxes of what your app looks like and see how the costs change. And if you really want to see exactly how we're formulating everything, you can just click on see the formulas. And you can walk through and change any of these inputs. So let's say you disagree that this is going to take you, 15 days. You can change it to whatever you want. And you can also change your team composition. Let's say your daily rate is a little more, or your daily rate is a little less. Then that will calculate all of that. And let's say, oh, I need a hybrid engineer as well. So that lets you see exactly how that changes everything. And the App Cost Estimator currently, you can also get a printout of your results and a permalink if you're interested.
Great. So another question that came in during the presentation was, we talk a lot about setting up an infrastructure to support a mobile application, but what if an organization has an existing infrastructure? Can that work with a platform like Convey, and if so, how?
Yeah, absolutely. We actually see this use case all the time with a lot of our clients where they have existing infrastructure pieces. Sometimes they even already have API management. The good news is that MBAS is really designed to work with all these different systems. So you're in very good shape. Even if you have some of the oldest legacy technology out there, we can still work with that and absolutely use MBAS.
Great, and real quick, one more question regarding the actual calculations. Do we use 8 hours as the daily rate in these calculations?
Yes, so we're assuming that it's 8 hours per day, and then of course, if you wanted to change any of that, you can calculate however much your developers are paid hourly. You can change that in here to whatever you want.
Great. So had a couple questions, asking about the difference between what we currently have on the website with the app cost estimator and what we have upcoming with the ROI calculator. You want to dive a little bit deeper into that?
Sure. So currently on the website, we don't do a lot of infrastructure selection. So there are new questions that are coming with the ROI calculator that are going to let you select the infrastructure that you currently have and that you're interested in working with, and that includes both on-premises as well as cloud infrastructures. And it shows you the difference between setting up on on-premises infrastructure versus using Convey. There's also questions that let you scale up your number of apps. So there's going to be a slider down at the bottom that lets you say, how many apps is this for? You can slide, between 1 and up to 20. There's some other pieces that are just a little bit of updated logic, but I think those are probably a little bit less user visible for people.
Great. I had another question. Somebody wanted you to go a little bit deeper into the moving from capital expense to an operational expense. Just explain a little bit more how that works and why that's valuable.
Sure. So I guess if I'm understanding correctly, they're not sure why an operational expense would be better than a capital expenditure. I can just go right back to that slide and kind of spend a little bit more time on it. So the overall idea behind it is that your Capex is, while yes, you can depreciate it, you end up stuck with your hardware for a while. And you also, because mobile is such a rapidly changing space in terms of technology, the kinds of equipment that you're going to buy for your mobile infrastructure now versus what you're going to want in 2 years from now is going to be vastly different, and you're going to have to go through all those budget approval processes again. Whereas if you're using a service, you can diversify your investment, and the tech choices that you have are always going to be the latest and greatest because you're paying those companies to think about that for you. It's not something that you need to spend the time worrying about.
Great, and then as a follow-up, so how does that work in the real world with Convey? So I'm sort of digging a little bit into this question, sort of trying to understand what the person is asking, but I think what we're trying to get at is, does it mean that you can actually offload infrastructure costs onto Convey? Do we eliminate the need to, I don't know, build a SQL server and stuff like that?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So with something like Convey, Convey is really a managed service for your mobile applications. You can also develop web applications using Convey. So a lot of those infrastructure costs that you would normally have to have, you can just absolutely negate with a service like Convey. You no longer have to worry about buying those blade servers. You don't have to pay for those networking expenses. That's something that Convey already does out of the box, and that's really the value of the service.
Great. And then another one was, and this is related to slide 17 in your presentation, is Convey the only company that's providing options for leverage in the app development world?
So you're talking about this
Yes,
this slide here?
slide.
No, Convey is actually in a space of MBAS players which is continuously evolving. So there are a number of different companies that provide MBAS services, and there are also a number of companies that provide what we call PaaS, which is Platform as a Service. And there are a lot of different ways that you can leverage different managed services. We think Convey is the best one, so. We invite you to try it. You can sign up for a free account, and it's completely self-service. Where if you want to kick the tires on Convey, you are welcome to, and we invite you to do so.
Awesome. And as a follow-up to that, you mentioned PaaS, but I'm not sure if everybody on the webinar understands what that is. You want to just give a quick overview of it?
PaaS is what we call Platform as a Service. So in terms of thinking about the depth of services provided, PaaS provides a kind of a base layer. It has some of your hosting, some of your data services, but it often doesn't have a lot of those other components that we talked about in that microservices tier and in the client services tier for connecting into your mobile applications. So PaaS is another type of managed service, but MBAS takes it a step deeper.
Awesome. And I'm going to combine two questions here. This is back to our app cost estimator, or our ROI calculator.
Sure.
How do we account for task complexity in that calculator? And also, when we talk about infrastructure, are we including everything, including hardware and maintenance and all that stuff?
Sure. So complexity we think of in a couple of different ways. So I'm just going to pull up the calculator here. So we think of complexity in a couple different ways. First of all, there's just a general, how big is your app going to be? So this is purely thinking about number of screens, and that thinks about, complexity on a very basic level. And then there's complexity of actual development, so things like how you handle your user management. Obviously, this checks some different boxes for if you're using enterprise services like LDAP versus how much you need to actually spend on the back end, and it shows you the difference between Convey and DIY. And there's a number of other questions that really get into complexity, so types of data that you're storing, existing data sources that you need to integrate and whether or not they're simple or advanced. And you can go into each of these questions and see what we're thinking about in terms of handling that complexity. But basically, I guess the answer is that the complexity is kind of built in with all these different questions, and that these toggle a lot of different checkboxes that you can go in and configure yourself if you want to kind of up the complexity of anything.
Awesome. And I apologize for leapfrogging around here, but I'm trying to make sure we get to the questions as they come in. I just got a great one asking, isn't Backend as a service the same thing as Platform as a service? And do you want to go into more detail about what the differences are?
Sure. So I think that the best way to look at that is maybe to take a look at our architecture slide. And this will allow me to explain the difference between Platform as a service and Backend as a service a little bit more richly. So Platform as a service is basically a component of MBAS. It provides some of this context layer that you see here. So a lot of platform as a services have things like, some push notifications, and they have a data store, and they have, a little bit of ability for you to write some business logic. But and sometimes they actually even like create a couple of libraries so that you can hook into some of your mobile apps. But what they're missing is all of this entire microservices tier and a lot of these actually pre-built mobile client features. So a lot of times they don't include offline caching, they don't include network management, they don't make sure that your data is secure at rest and in transit. And a lot of times they don't have connectors into your enterprise systems, so it can't work with everything. You have to cobble together a bunch of different services in order to make it work, which is something you can absolutely do, but we're kind of the mindset of why would you when you could use MS?
Great explanation. Another great question that just came in, do the costs that we have in our calculators, both on the do-it-yourself side and the using Convey side, do they take into account customized services? For example, a customized or specific data security method or server response speed or increased or decreased bandwidth, or are there additional costs on both, again, do-it-yourself or Convey, if a customer needs those services?
So if I'm understanding the question correctly, it's talking, they're more interested in if there's an additional services component that needs to be built, does the cost calculator factor that in? Is that right?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. I mean, I guess the answer is no. The cost calculator, I mean, if you wanted to say, okay, we have the need to build out a connector to a third-party cloud API, and that's going to take some extra services work, you could absolutely, if you wanted to, just say like, okay, this is going to take 10 days instead, and do it that way. But in terms of like, is there just a checkbox for like, I'm going to need additional services? Then no, not really.
I will say that we've sort of tried to build it into the app cost estimator and the ROI calculator itself. I mean,
yes.
We have multiple sort of levels of complexity in most of our categories that you can select from. So, that's a good place to start.
And it's also, if you know that you're going to need $10,000 worth of additional services, then I would say, once you've got your actual printout, you can just tack that onto the end and say, it's about 10 grand over this.
Awesome. Well, that looks like it's it for the questions for now. If anybody comes up with, something that they want an answer to after we end here, feel free to send an email to webinars@convey.com. That'll go straight to Caroline and I, and we'll try and get an answer to you as soon as we can. So thanks everybody for attending. Thank you, Caroline, for the great presentation, and we hope to see you guys on some of our future webinars as well.